everyone. I am Rabbi Michael Klayman from the Lake Success Jewish Center. Despite our remarkable advances in technology, medicine, and science, our nation continues to suffer from intolerance and racism. Our inability to engage in respectful and constructive dialogue is evident throughout our government institutions, our social, religious, and ethnic organizations, as well as in our interpersonal discourse. I agree with those who contend that we will never defeat racism and hate until we can first sit down together and, in the course of respectful dialogue, address the difficult and challenging questions we are often reluctant to ask. Purposeful dialogue, however, requires us to listen as well as to speak, to express our concerns and to share our pain, but to attentively listen as well as to speak. During a press conference at the end of the movie, The American President, President Andrew Shepard shares an ideal, elusive vision of American democracy. He says, "Let's see you acknowledge a man whose words make your blood boil, who is standing center stage and advocating at the top of his lungs that which you would spend a lifetime opposing at the top of yours." Those words were designed for a movie, but they express a vision and an aspiration so central to many of us, opening our minds and our hearts to the infinite possibilities of living in a truly open, pluralistic society. Tolerance does not require us to love one another, but to listen and be respectful and to advocate for another person's rights as we do for our own. Beginning with today's program, we will offer a series of open and candid dialogues with leaders from diverse faith, cultural, ethnic, and social communities. We will ask thoughtful questions, challenging us to honestly reflect upon our beliefs, our prejudices, and our hopes for a more open and tolerant America. We only ask that each viewer, whether or not you agree with the perspective discussed, keep an open mind. Hopefully, we will emerge from our dialogues about diversity with a greater understanding and respect for one another's views and concerns. So we are honored to dialogue today with Alan Mindell, principal of Samar Hospitality, a longtime family-owned business out of Long Island. Alan serves as chair of the board for the Holocaust Museum and Tolerance Center on Long Island, and he is a highly respected community activist. So, Alan, I want to welcome you and thank you for participating in our discussion. I was going to wait till the end of our discussion, but I think to set the tone, I need to ask this first. Can you share some of your family's experience and identification with the era of the Holocaust and experiences that your family underwent during that time?
Well, Rabbi, thank you very much for having me here today. And anything I can do to honor my family and the memory of those that we lost is always appreciated. My mother was from a town called Sebinia, my father from Krakow. When the Nazis came to Sebinia, my mother's father and her brother were taken out, dug their own graves, and murdered. Much of her family, luckily, her siblings survived, but her older brothers and her parents were murdered. She was in a work camp as a slave for almost the entirety of the war. She went through a great deal. She had little to eat, was very ill at the end, but was one of the lucky ones to survive. My father, Sam, was from Krakow. He was in an area that had very few Jews, He was both lucky and very smart. He was able to work in a printing press and forged his own identity after the Nazis came and was on the run for the majority of the war. They came back and met here in America, and I grew up with them and many other survivors that they were very close with. So that gives you a very specific perspective. People like me that are the children of Holocaust survivors were known as second-gen 2Gs, and our children are known as 3Gs.
I'm actually fourth generation. This is my wife's grandparents were survivors also. Wow. So I have a follow-up question, but I'm going to reserve that for the end.
You can take them all whenever you want.
So I want to just ask you about the museum. With all the museums around the country dedicated to the Holocaust, why one on Long Island, and what might distinguish the center from other museums elsewhere? Well,
it definitely is distinguished today. I would tell you, though, in the beginning, you know, here on Long Island, so many survivors came. Their American dream was born out here. And after they came, made a life for themselves and had kids, it all came home to them. And the statement that all survivors say all the time is, never again. And for so many that have lost so many, they needed a place to memorialize that. So, yes, there are Holocaust centers all over America because there are so many survivors that have so many people that they have to memorialize and remember. And it's these centers that did it for all of them. And here on Long Island, we had several hundred. So they needed a place like this. For the center, to honor the memory of those that were lost, to honor those that suffered, and to make sure it never happened again, the center began to focus on education, to tell the story of the Holocaust, to tell it from a background personal to the survivors and their own experiences, as well as the historical, political background of all the situations and circumstances that brought upon the Holocaust. And furthermore, what brings upon genocide and what can be done to prevent it and stop it. And to teach these lessons, to teach tolerance education, and to teach people to be upstanders, to stand up against hate. And so this lesson is taught today to, last year, 50,000 people by the center, most of them being on Long Island. Several thousand children in your schools, but also police officers, first responders. We're now to some military activities, teachers, professional development. So we try to teach as many people as we can, and the center has a great team of people, and more precious, we have docents and still some survivors that day in and day out tell the heart-wrenching stories of their families and make sure that these lessons are learned by so many. It's that education that distinguishes us.
So with the fading number of survivors as generations move on, focus needs to be directed toward younger generations. And I know that the center, as you mentioned, works with various education systems and school systems. I'm wondering, how receptive have the schools and the school systems been to work from the center, in particular when it comes to revising textbooks or teaching about epics of history, racism, the Holocaust, other ugly eras, unsavory, in which school systems were reluctant to teach. How receptive have the school systems been, and how effective has the center been really in reaching people? And what concrete results have emerged from all of these partnerships?
Well, candidly, school systems, some are more interested in what we have to offer than others. And we very much appreciate the schools that allow us to teach the children. Without that, we are nowhere. That's our most important thing, is to have access to children, access to classes, to teach these lessons. I have, and for so many of us that volunteer at the center, we've sat through these seminars and these classes. You know, I can't tell you the specific data, but anecdotally, when you see a child or a young adult go and sit and see the story of both what happened, why it happened, how it happened, and the personal tragedies of the people presenting, and then explaining to them what could have been done to stop it, it definitely makes an effect on them. And the way it gets summed up is a docent will tell a group, and a survivor will tell a group, they'll say, you know, I'm glad you got to hear my story, but all you got to do was hear my story. I haven't done much for you today. However, you know, there are 5% of the people in this class that probably hated me when I walked in, that probably had that in their core. And for them, hearing my story was of no benefit. And they hated me before I came, and they'll probably hate me after. And for those folks, we'll be ready for you. There's another 5% of the population that stood up for us, that were the righteous, that did everything they could to save us and protect us, protect all those that Hitler was after. And I'm sure that there's 5% of those people in this class today, and I'm so thankful to have met you and cherish that you were able to hear my story, but the truth is, the world would go on without you knowing it. What made Hitler successful was the 90% that stood by and did nothing in the face of it all. So the class is for you, 90%, to say, please learn from this, absorb it, and stand up. Stand up to the hate. Stand up for yourself and stand up for others that are experiencing it. Stand up for the society you want to live in. And when a kid hears that, or a police officer, or a nurse, in the best case, it changes them. And it makes them just a little more likely to fight for the better, more tolerant world we all want to live in.
So we live in a greater community which includes Asian Americans, Black Americans, Hispanic Americans. Does the center reach out to them, not only in terms of educating about the Holocaust, but also enabling others to understand the narratives within, let's say, the Asian community, the persecution that has been experienced elsewhere? Is the center effective in reaching out to educate people about other communities who suffered? Because
we definitely try to use these lessons and other genocides like Rwanda and other places and reach out to all these communities that have been the subject of hate. And we try to stand up for them, just like we teach through public statements, social media, and other forms. We make sure to have functions that we share with different communities to let them know that we're here and to let them know that we support them, you know, and to have some understanding. And we try to recognize people that stand up to hate. You know, we have a charity called the Claire Friedlander Foundation that every year awards scholarships to kids that fight for a better world, where they fight against the prejudice and hate and create a more tolerant atmosphere in their schools. So we're there not just for one community, but for all. And that's central to our mission.
So has the center been successful at all in encouraging school systems to revise textbooks or to be more inclusive of these epochs in history, so that it not only something that's just in general, but that even within the curricula themselves, we see change?
I think we have some influence over curriculum, not necessarily textbooks. We do have, part of what we do is educate and do continuing education for teachers. So we get the opportunity to talk to teachers directly and to make sure they understand our philosophy and our method, and for them to take that and pass that on throughout their curriculum, whether it be history or any topic that they're covering, to help as they go forward in their teachings.
So here's a tough question. I think it's a tough question.
Okay.
I know that the center partners with the Jewish community as well as with the Muslim Islamic community on Long Island. A couple of years ago, there was a situation in Israel which led to some severe criticism. I think it was even last year, to some severe criticism toward Israel from the Long Island Muslim community. The reason I mention this is it poses the question, how do we continue to work symbiotically, even amidst our differences? And is there really respectful and meaningful dialogue between Jews and Muslims? Is that a reality? How do we navigate all of the difficulties and the challenges that are faced when we clearly disagree ideologically, politically?
Right. Well, I would say a few different things on that topic, Rabbi. I'm a proud Jew, very proud of my faith, as I know you are. And I'm a proud supporter of Israel as well. And I think there is a conversation to be had about attacking Israel being an attack on Jews. There is a certain reality about that. That being said, Islamophobia is very, very real. Yep. It has occurred here. It has occurred all across America. And at the center, our focus with the Islamic community and the Islamic Center was simply to be there for that purpose, to explain that we were there to fight that phobia, that we stand against that, and that we stand against all hate, regardless of our views on other topics throughout. As much as I'm a supporter of Israel, that does not preclude me from being there and wanting to stand up for my Muslim brother that is being attacked in other ways, on other topics, and however it may be. And why we might not agree on Israel, and while, frankly, attacking Israel in many ways, I believe, is sometimes an attack on the Jewish religion and the Jewish people, the fact remains, people of the Islamic faith deserve to live freely, fairly, and in this country with free speech, and not to be the subject of attack. And we will stand shoulder to shoulder with that community whenever that occurs, period.
And it is reciprocal. I remember following one anti-Semitic incident. I don't remember the specifics. The Islamic Center on Long Island actually called for an evening of prayer, and they invited people from different faith communities. I know I was one of several who spoke. And following that, we received a communication from the Islamic community offering to help provide security at our synagogues if it was necessary. So I know that those coalitions continue,
yes.
And we need to be able to perpetuate that dialogue even amidst our differences. So speaking about differences, and along those lines, when I was growing up in America, Jewish Americans and African Americans, we shared a commonality of purpose, since racism and anti-Semitism were so prevalent everywhere. In recent times, unfortunately, some of these coalitions of the past have been severely challenged. In terms of, and using terms like intersectionality, for example, Jews in Israel have often found ourselves on the periphery, excluded from some of these newly established coalitions. So how do we proceed with dialogue under these contemporary realities and tensions? And I'm sure the center has ways to address that as well.
Well, what I would say is that in all forms, in all situations, we just have to be honest with ourselves and with our friends in all communities. The fact is that, you know, Jews in particular and African Americans in particular have a real bond that was created in the civil rights movement. And as a Jew, I'm very proud of Jewish representation in the civil rights movement. And I've seen firsthand, you know, organizations that represent African Americans. When Jews have been attacked, they too have stood up for us, and I'm very proud to see that. Does that mean that there aren't elements of a community that have said and done things that are abhorrent or reprehensible, or certain groups have tried to or have successfully excluded us in ways that are frankly prejudicial against us? It has occurred, okay? There's no way for us to deny that, and I will never deny it. I will never sit there and simply be okay with a group claiming to act in the best interests of fighting racism and hatred, but somehow has a problem with me because of my religion or my affiliation with a country, or to say that one country should be judged by a different standard than all others, and that it can be lied about and thrown through the mud in a way that's just reprehensible and not true. But we can't make everything about our relationship with African Americans based on the horrible actions or statements of some. Yeah. We always have to stay with grace on the other side of it. So that's how I would react to that.
So I remember growing up in a very open household. My mother taught, I'm from Newark, New Jersey. My mother taught in a school in Newark. I think for the last 15, 20 years of her teaching, there were no white students. So I really grew up in a household where an understanding of people was something that my parents taught. My father worked in a glass company in Newark with two bosses who would occasionally come to our home. One was this diminutive Jewish guy, Seymour, and the second was a very stately black American, Allen. I don't remember the last names, but I remember that they would come to our homes, and I never thought twice about the color of their skin or their religion. I just saw them as two people who were my father's bosses. They often came. They're very, very friendly and open. That's how I grew up. But I know that so many have not grown up in that environment. So what do we do with people who have grown up in an atmosphere of prejudice where there's just they've not had an opportunity to really have a greater understanding of someone else? How do we reach people? Or do we just abandon,
Well, I think you touched on what was one of the great equalizers in America, which is business, And I know in my industry, in the hospitality business, it's a guiding principle. Our business is fully populated with every minority group, of every sexual orientation, of every country that someone can come from. Mm-hmm. And we're an incredible melting pot of that. And I grew up luckily in that. And that always gave me such a rich blend of cultures to know and live with and see. And it's very hard to hate people that you get to actually know and live with and see. Mm. And when you see hate, it's usually derived from people who have no experience with other cultures or other people. So the key for us as a society is to keep on the side of making sure that we work with, we patronize, and we service customers of all groups, all faiths, races, religions, creeds, orientations. Because if we just do that, it's amazing how we get to know each other and how so many of these walls break down. So like it was for your father and your father getting to bring it home to you, it's that relationship starting in business. Yeah. It can be in sports. It can be in so many areas that bridges the gap. And that will always be the secret to success.
No, I think that's a wonderful statement. So I just have a couple of final questions that are related. I want to return now to the personal, which is why I asked you at the beginning to just share some of your family's personal experience. Understandably, I think many victims of racism and hate bear anger, and that anger they feel every day of their lives. Your family experienced a barbaric time which cannot even be articulated, can't even be expressed. And you've managed to navigate through life without that all-consuming hate.
Some would question you on that.
What?
Some would question you on that.
But you had the fact that your involvements, your community activism, your activism in the center. So how do we, from your experience, what kind of guidance can you offer to other people, say, who have experienced severe hate and intolerance, racism, to the point where they're not trusting of anyone? How do we guide them, perhaps, or how would you offer some guidance as to how we can help them navigate through that anger to be able to live in a community where, ideally, one day we will all get along?
Well, I'm not sure that all that hate can go away. I think it really depends on the person. And being a second-generation person and having Holocaust survivor parents, most of their friends were survivors. And many in our community, just like in the shul where you are a rabbi, many of those folks were survivors. And some were joyous all the time. Some were able to make friends and acquaintances over time of all groups. And for others, they never could. And they always had that edge. And a little bit of that edge, you know, it goes from that first generation. It doesn't just end there. It does come to us in the second, and maybe we send it a little bit to our third. We're mindful of it. As I get older, I get a little more mindful of it. Not always clear-minded. But you try. You know, it's a hard thing to come around to. For a long time, I would never buy a German car. Just wouldn't do it. My mother wouldn't do it under any circumstances. A couple of years ago, you may remember, Rabbi, there was a story out of Germany where there is a person appointed by the German government who is in charge of fighting anti-Semitism. And he lamented that maybe it isn't safe as it used to be for people in Germany to wear a yarmulke. Mm-hmm. The next day, that newspaper, the main paper that read that story, put a yarmulke on the paper for people to cut out, make, and wear. And all through Germany, people not Jewish wore yarmulkes so it would be safe for German Jews to wear them. The next week, I bought a German car.
Wow.
I knew right then and there that whatever hatred I had was misplaced, and that the sins of the father should not be put upon their sons and daughters. It's not an easy lesson to learn. It hurts every day. For our survivors, they never get over it, no matter how much they try. For the next generation, some of us do, some of us don't. And we can't make people forgive. We just have to hope that time and grace lets them do so. There's no other way.
So the story you told, it reminded me of a similar situation. I believe it was in Montana, where years ago there was an anti-Semitic incident against a Jewish family. And the following day, a local newspaper printed a picture of a Hanukkah menorah. And following that, people throughout the community placed that Hanukkah menorah in the window. And I know that was a subject for a movie as well. These are isolated incidents. We're living in a country now where the divisions are so palpable. Certainly, as Jews, we understand the challenges and sometimes the trauma that our students are experiencing on college campuses. But way beyond that, our political system, our environment in general, is one that is just, it's rife with division and strife. And some of us seem to be, on the verge of despair. this is the racism and the hatred is not something that's new. It's perpetuated from generation to generation. So my final question is there hope?
As long as there are people that are willing to fight for the world that they want to live in, that are willing to reach across an aisle, reach across a community, reach across a table, shake hands, make friends, make conversation, as long as people are willing to be kind to each other, there will always be hope. And I believe here in America we have more reason for hope than other places. But yes, it's under attack. Our way of life, our peaceful coexistence, the melting pot that you and I grew up in, the world that was created here through it, it's under attack by a lot of forces that want to divide us. Some domestic and some foreign. Some by new technology, some by other methods. It is important for all of us to do anything and everything we can every day to make this world in the view and in the vision that we want to see it. Because there are always others that are going to be fighting the other way. We have to fight harder. We have to stand up more. That's the key to it all.
So it just led me to another question. The social media is so all-pervasive today. How can the social media respond to issues, and how can we use the social media to be able to convey a message, which sometimes might just reflect views of a minority of people who are willing to stand up and to be besieged, but all in the name of openness and the vision of a more tolerant, peaceful, dignified world?
Well, I would say that there's two sides of that answer. One is that people on social media should stand up for other people on social media that are being attacked. And they should let people know that they are there, that they care for them, and that they don't go by the statements that may have been made or that were said. There were so many people that are not Jewish when we were so viciously attacked by so many recently on social media and other forums that were friends of mine that came out and said, I stand with the Jewish people. You know, and we have to be heartened by that and those statements. Yeah. And we must do the same when the African American community was under attack. We have to do that.
Because there's definitely racism. I've seen it within the Jewish community.
100%.
People,
there is,
and we have to call people out on that also.
None of us, you know, we all live in glass houses. Yeah. None of us are free of racism, of prejudice. None of us. We all have something there, and we just have to be honest about it and try to improve. None of us will ever be perfect, and that's not the standard. But on social media, we should stand up for each other where we can. The second part of it is, though, you know, everyone is entitled to their own opinion, but everyone is not entitled to their own facts. Yeah. And the job of the platform is to say, this may be free speech, but this is pure hate speech. This may be news and generally accurate. This is not accurate at all. It's just a blood libel. There needs to be a referee sometimes.
We need to distinguish between
We need to distinguish between the two, and they have to do it. And while I believe and understand the importance of free speech, and I never want to cut that, there needs to be an understanding that certain things are not free speech. They're hate speech, or they're blood libels, and they do cause pain. And they don't cause just emotional pain. They can physically manifest itself here. And there's a responsibility that these platforms have.
Yeah. And people don't realize that at times the ways this hatred spreads, when we see Uvalde, Texas, and we see Pittsburgh, and we see incidents all around the country, people are incited by other acts of hate. And I know even on the social media, when you have hate manifestos that are plainly evident on social media, it creates opportunity for people to just to just carry out their hate. And unfortunately, that's what we've seen far too often.
We just have to stand up to it as a society and as vigorously as we can. We also have to, when people do say or do things that are wrong, if they are made to or come to a point of apology, we have to move on and accept that as well. But we have to vigorously stand up. We have to be heard. The center does that. The center, when an event occurs that's racist or anti-gay or anti-Semitic, we're there to stand up. And it's one of the most important functions that I think the center has, because we teach a certain philosophy, we teach a certain history, we ask people to be upstanders, and we have to stand up ourselves.
Well, Alan, I want to thank you for your words. I want to thank you for your activism, for all that the center continues to contribute and how it enriches our society. And I hope people will listen.
I hope people visit the center. I want to just make a little disclaimer that
Absolutely.
I'm a tiny piece of the center. We have a great team of people, a great team of survivors, docents, volunteers, board members, and I'm a very small piece of that puzzle. I'm really proud and happy to have the opportunity to do it, but I'm a tiny piece of it.
Well, I hope our conversation at least represents the beginning of a call to action. So I want to thank Alan, and I want to conclude by referring to a scriptural reading from my tradition. In one of the Genesis scriptural readings we chant in synagogues throughout the world, often on Jewish Sabbath, Jacob has a dream about a ladder ascending to heaven. My hope is that both as individuals and as communities, we will ascend what I call the metaphoric ladder, a ladder which leads us upward, higher and higher, toward a world which is characterized by universal respect, dignity, and honor. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And thank you, Alan, again.
Thank you.